Welcome to Know Your Food, the podcast where we explore the world of food by speaking with farmers, makers, entrepreneurs, and experts who are reshaping how we think about what we eat. I'm your host, Michael Ray Robinoff, CEO and co-founder of Farm to People, and we're recording these conversations live from our warehouse in Bushwick, Brooklyn. On today's episode, we're talking with Ethan Frisch, the co-founder of Burlap Barrel, a company revolutionizing the spice industry by working directly with farmers and sourcing spices from all over the world. While we can't grow most spices locally in the Northeast, Burlap Barrel is changing the game with their organic, single-origin offerings that are fresher and more flavorful than what you find on grocery store shelves. Ethan takes us on a journey from farm to pantry, revealing how he came to start the company, how they decide what farms to partner with, his views on the turbulent food system, and even a quick history lesson on the connection between sugar industry and colonialism. I hope you enjoy this conversation as much as I did. Be sure to subscribe for future episodes. Thank you so much, Ethan Frisch, for being here. I think I'll start it off by saying I'm personally a huge admirer of Burlap Barrel, what you and Ori have built, and the incredible spice company you have created. I think we started working with you even prior to the pandemic. So I want to say we've carried Burlap Barrel spices for probably over half a decade. For those who's gotten to try them tonight, I think you can see why they're incredible. So yeah, I just wanted to say that and welcome you here to Farm to People tonight.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to talk about spices as usual. Yeah.
Amazing. Awesome. I guess before we jump in, I think spices are something that we all have in our shelves at home. Some of us use them more than others.
Nobody's perfect. Yeah.
What?
Nobody's perfect. Yeah.
Nobody's perfect. And I want you to help us paint, because I think we can envision the supply chain a little bit more easily for let's say a carrot that comes out of the ground in upstate New York or in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, gets put in a bag, gets on a truck, comes to Farm to People, gets put in your butt. We can understand that. Spices are more exotic. They come from all different parts of the world, and they often look very different when they're harvested to the final product that you see in your jar, on your shelf. Yeah. So I wanted you to kind of break down on a real macro level to start, just what does that supply chain look like before we even get started and get into why you started this business?
Sure, yeah, it's a good question. First of all, the supply chain for spices is ancient. Truly, we joke that this is the oldest profession, spice trading, going back thousands and thousands of years, this idea of moving something that was delicious from a place where it grew well to a place where it didn't. That's as old as human history. We've always craved interesting flavors and ingredients, and spices are kind of integral to who we are as human beings, I feel. So I like to ground the spice trade introduction in that. We've been doing this forever, as long as humans have been around. The process for spices is really ultimately not that different from a carrot. There's a drying stage, often a sorting stage, and the places that they come are a little less accessible than upstate New York or wherever your carrot might be coming from. The Robusta black peppercorns that you carry, that's from a single farm in Vietnam. These are two young guys who are committed to organic farming. Actually, one of them is kind of an influencer in Vietnam for organic farming and forest farming, primarily a coffee farmer. We call it Robusta pepper because he grows Robusta coffee, and the peppercorn vines provide the shade for the coffee bushes. But they do everything on the farm, and that's pretty typical for a lot of our suppliers, from growing the peppers, of course, to harvesting them, drying them. There's some minimal cleaning that happens, and then that's pretty much it. It gets packed up and shipped. We work with farmers on an annual, throughout the year on an annual basis, and we buy right at the season of harvest. So we get everything as fresh as possible. We're planning that out months in advance. This farmer in particular, and many others we've worked with now for, like you said, we're in our 9th year in business. So we've worked with farmers. Many of our suppliers have been our suppliers for that entire time. So we really get to know them, and we get to know the animal process, and we can plan really carefully. And it gets shipped into the country. There's always conversations about tariffs and other things. We import from almost 30 different countries. Most of our suppliers have never exported before. So in the context of the commodity market, where a spice might change hands a dozen times before it even leaves the country of origin, where a smallholder farmer is selling to a local broker, a buyer, a middleman, of whether that's a company processing the peppers, or a local, a guy in a little town with a little warehouse on a truck who drives farm to farm during the season and buys from all of his neighbors essentially and then sells on to somebody else. That's the way the commodity system works. It's still mostly black pepper. There are a few exceptions to that, but mostly commodity spices are sold in that way. Farmers selling into this like sort of an hourglass where there's a lot of farmers at the top, and it comes down to a smaller number of exporters, and then a small number of importers, and then it comes back out on the U.S. side. Anyway, we set up a supply chain directly from the farm. We buy from the farmer and then make it available basically immediately.
Which leads me to like my question about why do your spices taste more vibrant? Why do they like smell? Is that because the current commodity market, it's a more convoluted or more of this hourglass, like longer tail supply chain, that this is more direct? Like you're able to get fresher spices, or does it not really have anything to do with it?
Freshness definitely has something to do with it. And like I said, we're planning on that annual cycle. So we get everything is very fresh. But no, it's mostly that there has never been a market for specialty spices before. Why do your carrots taste better? Because the farmer is amazing. The soil is great. You work with them closely. So there's a relationship. It's a lot of the same reasons. We're buying from farmers who care deeply about what they do, who have developed a real expertise, sometimes themselves as kind of entrepreneurs, but sometimes as the 10th generation to farm cinnamon. These are traditions that go way, way back, and people really know what they're doing. Like you learn what to do after 10 generations of doing it. So that's another reason why they taste so good. Another reason is that we find producers who are growing things that are different. There's a quality consideration, but there's also a uniqueness consideration. There are many different, probably thousands of varieties of black peppercorns. Mm-hmm. They all will taste a little bit different. The peppercorns might look different, the plants, different yields, all kinds of variables. But we find farmers who are growing varieties that are developed for flavor, often heirloom varieties or special varieties that might be lower yield, but ultimately taste better. We get a lot of wild products. Anyway, I could go on forever, but yeah.
You usually think about like black pepper as just black pepper, paprika as just paprika. All of a sudden, when I started looking at burlap and barrel jars, I thought, now I think about royal cinnamon or these different types and varieties. Not to like dwell on commodity spices, but are those taking different types of black peppers and just calling them one thing?
They don't even call them anything, but yes, that's exactly what they're doing. I mean, cinnamon is a good example. So black pepper is different because it's all the same species grown in different countries, so different terroir, different varieties, but cinnamon is actually different species. There's kind of classic Vietnamese species, a Chinese species, an Indonesian species, a Sri Lankan and Southern Indian species. So when you buy cinnamon at the supermarket, it's probably either the Cinnamomum cassia, the traditionally Chinese species grown now mostly in Vietnam, or cinnamomum, which is the Indonesian species. That's typically what you find. Ceylon cinnamon is the Sri Lankan variety called Cinnamomum verum. True cinnamon, there's this kind of misnomer that cinnamon is true cinnamon and the others are not. It's honestly European naming conventions that gave this one the Latin name of true and the other ones other Latin names. But they're all Cinnamomum genus. Anyway, they're all cinnamons. People have this funny hang up on the true cinnamon question, which is why I mentioned it, but I already forgot your question. No, there's a lot of different cinnamons from around the world, and they taste different. Commodity cinnamon is usually a mix, and it's usually old, and nobody knows where it came from.
Yeah. No, I mean, you see the same thing in vegetables, that the best yielding vegetable is not necessarily the best tasting vegetable, and that's the one that ends up in our grocery stores. And I wondered if the same was true for cinnamon.
Yeah, definitely. The lower yield, the better the flavor. Typically, in spices at least, that's been my experience, that the commodity market really incentivizes farmers to grow for volume. The more they grow, the more money they make. It's not about quality, it's about quantity. And so what we've tried to do is find farmers who are already rejecting that model, but have not yet found a market that's ready to meet them, and we are. Many of our partner farmers have already sold into the commodity market, or they'll sell if they have some excess that we're not buying or they don't have another buyer for. They'll sell it into the commodity market. It's always there. But they prefer not to. They want their product to be appreciated. They're doing all this work, and often it's a lot of work to produce a high-quality spice. They want to get some recognition for it, which there isn't any opportunity to do through commodity, but there is through us. I mean, we put their pictures on our site and talk a lot about them because they're the reason that the thing tastes good in the first place. So
yeah. I mean, part of the reason I wanted to talk to you is I see so many parallels in what you're doing for spice farmers and what we're trying to do for farmers locally, and the idea that a carrot is not a carrot you might like, Simon from Sunsprouts carrot more than some other farmer that we carry even. You get that feeling a little bit when you go to like the farmer's market, and I wanted to see if you could, emulate that online. When you go to the farmer's market, you often are like, I'm going to go to that booth for that thing. Totally. And I think there's something wonderful about that. That is truly like soil health and something magical that makes a carrot or a cinnamon, taste different. And I also wanted to say, I think what's cool is you guys are doing spices. Like we sell a lot of Jimmy Nardella peppers, wild ramps. Ramps are super popular, but only for a very limited season. What's it been like for you guys to go into some of these very seasonal, more local spices and to give them a platform year round, really?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, the Jimmy Nardellas, some of you may have tasted, those are from Norwich Meadows Farms. They're in Chenango County, a stalwart of the green market for a long time, and just an amazing farm, and personal friends of mine and mentors in this journey of starting Burlap Barrel 9 years ago. So I love working with them any chance I get. We have a few other spices from them. We do Tokyo Negi scallions, which is a particular Japanese variety that's kind of meant for slow cooking, long simmering. They dry really nicely. I cook with them all the time at home. We're doing an experimental pepper variety this year. Anyway, it's always fun to work with local producers. We also get ramps from the Adirondacks. We get balsam fir tips from them as well, which we don't even dry. We blend the fresh balsam fir, and it gets mixed into a salt. And that salt is also a local salt from Syracuse. So, we do a lot of global sourcing, of course. We work with farmers in 30 different countries, but we are also able to work with local suppliers for some interesting things, which is really fun.
Yeah, no, thanks for explaining, because, you think spice company, you think global, but there's so much that can be done locally, which... Yeah. Good segue into who is Ethan? You obviously know a thing or two about flavor. I know a bit more than maybe others do about your past. I know that you came into spices by way of being a chef. So I'd love to just we like to do this. We like to learn a little bit about who the people are that we're talking to.
I've been doing this a long time. My background is half in restaurant kitchens and half in international development. Graduated college in 2008, one of the worst years to graduate college, and needed a job and found myself in a restaurant kitchen. I had no culinary experience at all, but was a good home cook. I grew up cooking with my dad and got my ass kicked in restaurant kitchens, which I loved. It was just a blast. And then did that for a few years, worked for Floyd Cardoz at Tabla, sort of learned about spices from him. I'm Jewish, I'm from the Upper West Side. Spices were not a huge part of my kitchen growing up, but I got to work for Floyd and learned a lot, and then decided that I wanted to be an aid worker. So I left kitchens, I went to graduate school, and moved to Afghanistan ultimately, where I worked for an NGO called the Afghan Foundation. I wound up living there for about 2.5 years, traveling a lot through really remote rural areas, especially in the Northeast. I was working on mostly infrastructure construction projects, grant monitoring essentially. So visiting these very remote villages where we were building a school or a bridge or some other piece of infrastructure, places I would never have had a reason to go to. Very few outsiders would wind up there. And that part of Afghanistan is famous domestically and even regionally for this variety of wild cumin that grows high in the mountains. Has a very short harvest season. We're talking 15 to 20,000 feet altitude. So the summer is very short. Village-based cooperatives go out into the hills and harvest cumin. The plants themselves kind of look like weeds. They have these lacy white flowers during the summer. And then as the flowers get pollinated, each flower turns into a tiny little cumin seed. They'll pluck the whole kind of dried out flower, put it in a basket or a piece of fabric or something. And as they're walking back down the mountain to the village, little cumin seeds will fall out and kind of reseeds for the next year. And then the seeds, this is an ancient process. This has been done for a very long time. Badakhshan cumin, it's a thing. Most Americans aren't aware of it, but it's a real thing. The seeds get winnowed, tossed in the air. The wind blows away the chaff, the really traditional process. And then it gets trucked down to Kabul. This is one of our first products. We've been managing this supply chain since 2016. I'm very proud to say we've kept up shipments every year, including the year the Taliban took over. We still were able to get a shipment out of the country. We've done shipments every year since then of I think our order this year was about 3.5 tons. So we're buying at a certain volume. So we can really have some impact at origin. We can support communities, not to get too deep into the political situation in Afghanistan, but it's tough economically. It's especially tough for women. Any money that can come into the country from the outside has a huge impact. And so to be able to maintain the supply chain and continue to buy this product is important for me personally, important for our customers because it's amazing, but then also important for our suppliers at origin.
For the farmers, yeah. That's a wild.
Anyway, that's the origin story. I started the business out of my apartment, my 1-bedroom apartment in Queens. I had no idea what I was doing, but I had some amazing spices. I'd started bringing this cumin from Afghanistan. I had met through some friends a co-op in Zanzibar. We buy quite a bit from them, peppercorns and cinnamon and some other things. I was driving out to the airport at 2:00 in the morning in my grandfather's little Toyota Matrix to load in sacks of stuff and haggling with the customs officer because I didn't have the right paperwork. Truly, I had over a metric ton of spices in my 1-bedroom apartment in Queens. And I'd get an order from a restaurant, this is 2016, or open up the sack and scoop out a pound of cinnamon. I don't know why I was so committed, but I really was. And the business grew slowly. We were selling a lot to restaurants in those early days where I had some connections, and I would take a backpack and cold call, like walk through the East Village at 4 p.m. and knock on doors. And we grew slowly, but COVID was a huge boost for our business in this kind of ironic way. All of our restaurant accounts closed. Got a few months of existential crisis, and then our business exploded with home cooks.
Everyone was cooking at home.
Everybody was cooking at home. Everybody's bored with their usual recipes and experimenting and trying new things. We were well positioned enough. We were 3 years in. We had inventory. We had warehouses, but it wasn't me in my apartment anymore, thankfully. And that was just a huge growth opportunity for us. And our business changed very dramatically. We went from being mostly a restaurant supply company to now being mostly a consumer-oriented spice company. And at the same time, we've connected with a lot of new suppliers around the world. We've expanded our lineup pretty significantly. We have over 100 spices from 30 different countries, 800-odd partner farmers.
That's incredible. I just to drill in a little bit more on the supplier and farm partners, because I think that, not to say that it was an accident that you found your first farm, but in a way it was.
Totally.
It was like serendipity. You were there for a different reason.
Yeah.
You found something that was like blew your mind. You had the prior training in one of the best kitchens in New York.
For spices especially.
For spices especially, with a chef who I know you partnered with his widow. Unfortunately, he passed during COVID. But I think it's really, really interesting to think of like, a lot of people have ideas. A lot of people are inspired. How did you take this inspiration, half a world away, and then figure out how to like then create a supply chain network in 30 different countries where you're at today? And even more, maybe just so it's a really personal question. Ultimately, these are supplier farmer partners. These are real human relationships that you need to go build. And I know how hard that can be, when they're 100 miles away. I can only imagine what that looks like, when they're 3,000 or 4,000 or 6,000 miles away. And how do you build that trust as well? Because trust is such an important part of what you're doing, obviously for on the customer side, but before the customer even gets a chance, it has to be on the farmer, vendor, supplier side.
Yeah, you just show up, I have found, like you go there, and most farmers around the world have never had a buyer come to the farm, express interest in what they do and how they do it. That's the first thing, and it makes a huge impact. We sit down with potential partner farmers and we talk through their business, our business, and our pricing. We call it sort of euphemistically farmer-led pricing, which really just means we pay them whatever they want, because ultimately it winds up being a fraction of the final cost, and that opens a lot of doors. People are happy to trust you when you don't haggle, like when you pay them what they want to be paid. So that's another element of it. Yeah, another big part of it is that I love this, as you can probably tell, I love spices, and I love our spices especially. So to have that shared appreciation for a farmer to have me show up on the farm and not only be there, but also be so thrilled to be there. Like I'm at my happiest visiting a spice farm. So that comes across, like people are excited to host us and excited to work with us. And then, we try to be organized and try to get ahead of things and tell them what we're going to need ahead of time. And we often put quite a bit of money down, often 6 months before the harvest. So that could be 12 months before we even see the product. In Hungary, we work with a very intense, brilliant paprika farmer, as many of our partner farmers are intense and brilliant, because you have to be to do it in this, like the old way. We pay him, a very large percentage of the total price in March for something that he's not going to harvest till October, and we probably won't get it till January. We are as generous as we can be to cover costs that farmers need. That also helps them farm better if they have the cash on hand for organic inputs instead of chemicals, and to hire the team that they need to do the planting and harvesting. If they're not strapped for cash, they can produce a higher quality product. That's been pretty consistent, so we do that too.
Totally. I love that you're saying something that's a little bit, like provocative, especially in like, in America, this idea that like a vendor or a farmer could name their price. I want to point to your pricing, and what we sell your spices for is very, very competitive with
often
spices
less than supermarket prices, by the way. Yeah.
Which something doesn't make sense there. Like the farmer's winning, you're winning, we're winning, the customer's winning. That doesn't sound very American.
It's because we don't sell. Yeah, right. Exactly. Everybody wins. We don't sell through big grocery chains, and that's where the margin disappears. We have our own significant direct-to-consumer business, the higher margin business. So we work with partners like you who really care about the product and do a great job promoting it. We don't have to spend a ton of money on silly marketing stunts or, slotting fees and all the crazy costs that go along with grocery distribution. We're able to to spend the money where it matters, on the quality of the product.
Yeah, and I think that's our whole premise. People really do see that value and taste that value, and I think it's a realignment of our own I think perception about price and what we're trying to go for and how much we're eating and how much we're throwing away when you really think about fewer things of quality. And I think you can look at people that wear Patagonia or brands like that, where you're oh, I'll have one great jacket that I can have for the next 10 years as opposed to 10 Shane jackets. I have never shopped on Shane, but I've heard you can buy them for very, very cheap. And so this idea that maybe there's a similar premise to food, obviously it doesn't have the 10-year shelf life, but this idea of quality that makes you feel good and that is generally just healthier for all of the parties involved. And I don't know if you can taste that, but there's something there.
Yeah, sure. I mean, part of our business strategy is also to not be a premium thing. We want to be the spice that you reach for on a daily basis because it has such an immediate impact on your food. I mean, it just makes a huge difference. Spices are pure flavor, and to upgrade your meat supplier, or that could be an expensive proposition. But to buy a better jar of spices that's not more expensive but has an immediate impact on a day-to-day basis, we want people to use our spices regularly. We don't want them to feel like it's a luxury. It should, they're meant to be your daily drivers in cooking, and that's really where they have their impact.
Totally. So that's I think a challenge that, probably everyone is a little bit guilty of, where you have a spice jar in your spice cabinet that you're embarrassed to look at the date on it.
I love it. My grandmother has cloves from the 80s or something. Yeah. I keep them now. It's like a museum. I love it.
Yeah, exactly. It's embarrassing because it's not Burlap Barrel, but I was showing someone Frontier. I think you probably didn't even exist yet when I bought this Frontier spice.
I won't take it personally. It's all right.
But Frontier has since rebranded, kind of to look a little bit more like Burlap. But they have this old. Anyway, I have something from that generation of spice.
The chalkboard.
Exactly.
Yeah.
People, I think, over the last decades, this generation have really they cook less. They're more fearful in the kitchen. If they do cook, they rely on things meal kits or whatever that kind of give you the little bit of this or the little bit of that you sort of use up, but never really. I think part of the fun of cooking is the improvisation of, oh, let me throw a little bit of this or a little bit of that. But if you're constantly reliant on recipes or on kits, you don't have that room to play. I would imagine one of the issues and one of the challenges, but also one of the opportunities for Burlap and Barrel's next stage of growth is how to get people to engage with their spice cabinet more. I think we've seen this over the last decade in hot sauce. So I think people are finding a need to sort of flavor their food, and this is the easiest way to do it. But spices is going even a step further back. You can almost create your own blend. So I'm just sort of curious, how are you thinking about that as a company, and especially one where you're going direct to consumer a lot right now, but I know your plans are to do, more wholesale and retail, which puts you a little bit of a step away from customers. So how can we farm to people help
do
that too?
I mean, we found when we had that huge growth spike through COVID and beyond, we found that our natural customers, this was even pre-COVID now that I think about it, were mostly over the age of 50, mostly women, mostly outside of big cities. Those are the best cooks in America, it turns out. You start a company kind of thinking that you're selling to yourself. I live in Queens, but it turns out I'm not selling to myself at all in this case. The best home cooks are women who cook on a regular basis for family or guests or friends. Cooking as a creative outlet, a form of expression. We found this uptick in a particular population. And so over the years, we've tried to get younger, and it hasn't worked that well, to be honest. Young people, I have found, they like hot sauce, I guess, but I have found them, especially in cities, to be very conservative, very intimidated by spices. I don't really understand why, but they are. I do think that, there's a little bit of a cultural thing. America is a meat and potatoes kind of country, and spices are seen historically as being frivolous or unnecessary or just not, you didn't need them, but actually we do, as the culture shifts, as the population shifts, I think people are becoming more open to spices, but there's still that kind of cultural hang-up, that kind of American cultural hang-up where people just use garlic powder and black pepper and cinnamon and call it a day. So how do we get people to try new things? I don't have an answer to that question. I think just putting things in front of people, not taking ourselves too seriously. We have a whole marketing approach around that, which, works in limited ways. That's what I'm saying. I haven't really found the answer to it yet.
Yeah. I think it's a fun question to pose because it's one that I think, we're differently experiencing that. But like, obviously, the premise of our business is really about getting people to cook more. And I think the premise of your business is not dissimilar. There isn't like a ready-made way to necessarily just like enjoy spices. I think that that's something that more than our generation and I think, that is like that younger and even younger than us. I think that there's like this lack of knowing how to cook and comfort in the kitchen. I find a lot of people like, what do I do with this? What do I do with that? Which I also see though as an opportunity, because it's not that hard.
No, it's really not. Yeah, exactly. Just sprinkle it, like just put it in.
Just try it. Taste it. Put it in your mouth.
What's going to happen? I mean, it's not that risky. We talked about like, could we like sponsor a pizza? Like if you cook and it doesn't come out good, we'll buy you a pizza. Or like how do we get people to not be so nervous? I don't know. I will mention we did self-publish a little booklet, 13 fundamental techniques for cooking with spices. We called it Grind to Garnish. So it's intended to give people that. Like here's some ways to use spices in baking, in stews, in different applications. We hired an illustrator, did these beautiful watercolors to help people visualize it. I don't know, it hasn't worked that well. That's what I'm saying. But we have it. It's
turn it
nice.
into a TikTok.
Yeah, exactly.
When it comes to like shelf life, right, of spices, how do you want people to sort of like view? Do spices actually have a shelf life? If I'm looking at that spice that's from 2012. Should I be throwing it away and buying burlap?
Yeah, right.
No, but like, how do we think about like a shelf, like the same way you would think about shelf life for anything else in your fridge or even I understand shelf life is not the same across different products, but for spices, how do you view that?
Yeah, I mean, spices don't get better with age, so use them, don't store them. We get this question a lot, how should I store my spices? And my snarky answer is always use them, don't store them. And we recommend that people, put your spices out where you can see them on a shelf or in a cupboard or in a drawer where you can grab what you need so that you can cook a little more flexibly. But we're buying right at the point of harvest. We put a 3-year best buy date. Spices don't go bad, so you don't have spoilage concerns or food safety concerns, but they do lose their intensity. Your best bet is in that first year. They do start to decline. Ours will decline slower because we're starting the clock earlier. We're buying right at harvest versus supermarket spice that has been sitting in a warehouse for a year and then it takes 2 or 3 years before it even gets to the store shelf. Yeah, it's just not going to taste that much and not going to taste that. You're going to lose a lot of the subtlety. Peppercorns may still be a little hot, but all of the nuance, all the kind of uniqueness of the origin and the skill of the farmer, that all gets lost.
Got it. And when you look at, I want to talk about some of the other products that you have and that you're going into, because I think it's really, really interesting. You started through what we all consider spices. Now you are getting into salt and sugar. I think both really, really interesting. Yeah. Sugar being one that is, we think about spice commodities. Sugar, I think, similar to coffee, is such a commodified product. Yeah. So talk to me about the journey to sugar and how do you want people to sort of think about sugar differently, use sugar differently. And obviously I can imagine in this instance, because sugar is really, really cheap, how are you going to reframe the value there? Because I can't imagine that, without subsidies and barges and all of the crazy supply chain that's largely broken in that realm is not going to look very similar. So talk to me about sugar and salt.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I love starting with sugar is super cheap is that's the place to start, because then you have to ask, why is it cheap? Sugar is a whole conversation. I'm not going to get into too much detail here, but the transatlantic slave trade was oriented towards the production of sugar in the Caribbean. So much of modern history is underpinned by the economics of sugar, industrial agriculture, the invention of the assembly line that happened on sugar plantations in the Caribbean, all the way up to modern diet-related diseases. I have gone down a rabbit hole on this. It's been a personal project of mine for quite a few years at this point. Sugar is the root of all evil, as I've come to refer to it sort of jokingly. And what do I do? I have a funny little spice business. How can I make an impact on that huge global and historical scale? I can sell a couple of products that provide a counter narrative. I'm not going to take on Domino's, an interesting company with a really dark past and worth looking at more closely, separate conversation. But I can provide an alternative when people realize the problems with those supply chains, the damage they've done to our bodies and our planet, and they want to find something better, we have quite a few options. And we have a panela from Colombia, a designation of protected origin product managed very closely by the Colombian government, a very old style of making sugar that involves tossing essentially lava, like molten sugar syrup through the air in buckets to aerate it. It's a crazy process. I went to visit one of those producers a few years ago. That's panela. Jaggery from India, same farmer who grows our turmeric. He's an Ayurvedic pharmacologist by training who put himself further back in the supply chain, became a farmer because he kept seeing the same diet-related diseases come up again and again in his patients. So he decided to become a farmer. And for him, farming is truly a spiritual practice, not an exaggeration. It's the way that he engages with his religion is by growing Ayurvedic ingredients, turmeric, cane, sugar cane for jaggery. And then he works with a local sugar maker, essentially, who processes his jaggery, boils it down in these big cast iron pots, a very old process. India, probably 5,000 years ago, is probably the site of the first sugar cultivation. Sugar is native to Papua New Guinea. It's in the grass family, but was cultivated probably for the first time in India to make jaggery, a very similar thing to what we sell now on our site. And just has an amazing flavor. When you eat refined sugar, all of the impurities, the color, the flavor, it's so on the nose. Removing the brownness from sugar, which is inherently brown, to have a white product to sell to white people. That was the marketing of it historically. This association with medicine, with purity, had to be white when sugar truly is not. And the amount of work that has to go into removing all of those things is kind of excessive, including filtration through animal bone char. So they take animal bones from the meat industry, turn them into charcoal, and use that charcoal to filter the liquid sugar. That's part of the refining process. So there's this vegan element there. Anyway, a long story about sugar, but I'll just mention the others that we sell. We sell a golden crystal sugar from Barbados. Barbados was the first island in the Caribbean to be colonized and the first sugar-producing colony for the British, and is now the last coral island in the Caribbean still to grow sugar. The limestone in the coral provides filtration for the water in the soil, and you get a beautiful flavor in the sugar, to talk about terroir like you would for coffee or wine or other agricultural products. And it's at risk of being lost. As you mentioned, they can't compete on the commodity market. And who else is going to buy it? There's no specialty market for sugar yet. That's what we're trying to create. And then we also work with some other non-cane sugars. We have a maple sugar from Vermont, a woman who's figured out how to make maple sugar, granulated sugar from very dark syrup, which, like anybody who knows, maple syrup, the darker the better. But for some chemical reason I don't understand, it's hard to turn that into a granulated sugar, and she's figured it out. So that's a very cool product. She also it's all wood-fired, just the old style of making maple sugar. And we just launched a powdered coconut sugar from Indonesia. This is made from the nectar of coconut flowers that are cut, and the nectar drips down and is collected and boiled down for hours to make a very sticky syrup that's then dried and ground into a fine kind of powdered sugar powder. Super easy to use in beverages, in icing, in baking. Yeah, and a cool product.
Amazing. I think, to me, if there's a way to see what we've gotten to experience sort of in like specialty coffee, also just even thinking about like local honey, it's just like it's going to elevate the flavor in a way that Domino's would never,
that was some of the opportunity that we saw here from a business perspective. You mentioned salt, but we looked at the market for specialty salts, which is huge and growing.
No one's doing sugar.
There's no equivalent in sugar. That seems like an opportunity we should move on. And then also, looking at coffee drinkers or tea drinkers, people are spending a bunch of money to buy high quality beans, and then you can't put sugar in it because you can't ruin it with Domino. You need a sugar that stands up to the coffee, both quality-wise, sourcing-wise, and flavor-wise. And these really do. The panela from Colombia, especially. Colombia is a huge coffee growing country, and that's kind of what they grow the sugar for, is to go with coffee. So there's a connection.
Yeah. I think sugar is a really good segue to because it is this really, really complicated global exploitative system. And I think a lot of our food system has become global and exploitative. I'm curious, just, more broadly than even through your lens, given where we are politically right now, where do you see the whole food system headed, and what's a small role that anyone listening can think to just elevate their consciousness a little bit?
I think we're going to see a lot more food safety outbreaks. The industry is being deregulated very quickly, and regulation has barely been enough to keep up with food. I don't know if people have been following the news, but there have been a lot of listeria and E. coli outbreaks, and at a huge scale. recently, I think we're just going to see more of that. And that's where companies like yours and mine come in, where, if you buy from a trusted supplier, the farmer, it doesn't change a lot of hands. You know the facility where food is being held or processed, and that's even in that case, it's only happening for a very short period of time. You're not warehousing things forever, where there would be opportunities for microorganisms to grow. And my number one piece of advice would be to buy from traceable sources, because the big corporations, I think we're just going to see more and more of these serious food safety outbreaks. I think the supply chains are going to get a lot dirtier. And that's going to have an impact on poor people who don't have other options. I think that's part of where our food system is going. And then on top of that, the tariff conversation, we import from 30 different countries. Spices typically are duty-free. We're not competing with any domestic production, and so we're able to bring things in pretty easily. The laws were based on the kind of product, not the country that you're sourcing from. We have been working on a project in Mexico for 2 years. As a sidebar, all of the Mexican chilies available in the U.S. are grown in China, or a huge percentage of them are grown in China, imported to Mexico, and packed in Mexico to be brought across the border. There are no traceable Mexican chilies available in the United States. None. For a country that's right there, not to mention the huge Mexican-American population, all the Mexican cooking that happens here, there are no traceable supply chains for chilies from Mexico. So I decided to try it in our funny little way, decided to try to do something about that. So it took quite a while, but we found a farmer in Guanajuato 2 years ago. Then there was a drought and then an insect infestation. We lost the whole first shipment. Then we're trying to bring it in this year. I just tell you this whole story to illustrate. We've been working on this for a long time. I've been there 3 times myself. And now we have this tariff thing pop up at the last minute. We're about to get across the border, and suddenly there's going to be tariffs anyway. So that's just a particularly challenging situation on that product. And the point ultimately is the unpredictability of not knowing if we're going to be able to bring things in reliably, commitments to our suppliers, not to mention to our customers. So that's the other unpredictable element of it.
Yeah, and I think people don't realize all the different component, packaging. So much of even if your food is grown locally, the containers are made abroad. The equipment to make the box, it's just so many levels of issues that are not necessarily in this made in this country. So I think we're going to see prices in a way that
we don't have any meaningful manufacturing. Anyway, this is a whole other conversation. What does anybody think is going to happen? Stuff's going to get more expensive. We'll see. Yeah.
I thought on January 20th the price of eggs was going to come down. Right,
exactly.
And it's
I paid $10 for eggs in Queens the other day. $10.
You got to shop on
at the supermarket. How much are your eggs?
$7.90.
There we go.
$7.99. Yeah.
Nice.
$7.49.
Yeah, right.
This is the last question.
Sure.
We're trying to have a theme, and on maybe a more positive note, maybe not. What's your personal ethos around eating for you and your family? I know you've got 2 young kids.
Yeah.
Obsessive.
Well, this is my life. I spend all my time thinking about food supply chain, so I can't turn that off. And I have 2 little kids. I have a 2.5-year-old and a 9-month-old, and my 9-month-old is really now eating solid food now. So I source all kinds of wacky stuff. I buy my rice from a rice farmer I know in California. We eat a ton of popcorn in my house. Anson Mills has really great popcorn. I shop in my green market, the Jackson Heights Green Market, every week. I do my grocery shopping there. It also tastes better. It's better for you. I started it because I was kind of obsessed with knowing where all my food came from, but it really has a huge impact. I mean, it tastes better. You feel better food. So anyway, that's my ethos.
Thank you for sharing. Thank you, Ethan Frisch, for being here tonight.
Yeah. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for listening to Know Your Food, a podcast from Farm to People. If today's conversation got you thinking differently about what's on your plate or where it comes from, we'd love if you shared this episode with a friend or left us a review. It helps more people discover the folks reimagining the future of food from the ground up. And if you're in the New York tri-state area, you can shop from our network of small, regenerative, independent farms and makers at farmtopeople.com. And stay in the loop by signing up for our newsletter or joining us on Instagram @farmtopeople. Until next time, eat well and know your food.